right, hello students and welcome to days 3 and 4 of digital art. Today we are going to be focusing on this particular artist you see here, whose name is Eyvind Earle. Notice it's spelled a little weird, so if you got to Google him, make sure to copy the way it's spelled there. And we are going to be looking at his landscape paintings. And yes, he's a traditional artist, but you will quickly notice that his paintings are super relevant to digital art making and that you are capable of easily reproducing his style for your own landscape. So Eyvind Earle was a Disney painter for movies way back in the day. We're talking about Sleeping Beauty and Peter Pan and all these type of 60s, 70s Disney movies where the landscapes were painted by hand and used in a very specific way under glass panels that had the actual animation on them. So this is actually one of the backgrounds from Sleeping Beauty. You're probably already noticing that he is not a super realistic landscape painter. His stuff is really stylized, and that's going to be really helpful for us when we go to do our landscape. So here's another example of one of his paintings, and you're probably already noticing that he uses these very, very bold, simple shapes that he then adds texture on top of. The texture many times is almost like a stamp that repeats over and over again. So we'll be able to use our brushes along with some of our selection tools to make these nice clean shapes with textures in them. We are also going to be using our layers to be able to effectively do this without things getting too muddy. So the one thing I want for you to definitely keep in mind and notice while I am doing the time lapse of me making a Eyvind Earle inspired landscape is all the use of layers. The other thing I really want for you to pay attention to right now is the use of color. Eyvind Earle's paintings are not just blue and green and brown. They are way more exciting and interesting than that. Many times they have really bold black silhouettes and really intense, vivid colors. And then these really beautiful silhouettes of all these ornate branches. Notice all the purples and pinks in here. His ground many times has lines on it that give the illusion of perspective. And he also stays away from doing soft gradients. So as opposed to using gradients for this project, we are going to be doing the stair-stepping type procedure where you use your selection tool and make it bigger or smaller with every single step as you go and adjust your color to be a little bit more vibrant or a little bit darker or whatever it is that you're attempting to go for. Here's another really, really lovely example of all that color. Yay, really fun. Now, you are not going to straight up copy an Eyvind Earle. However, you are going to choose an Eyvind Earle that you like the colors from and essentially steal those colors. Now, Eyvind Earle usually uses maybe 4 or 5 colors at the most. It's not going to be Rainbow Town, USA. So don't say, Machina, I'm going to use the entire rainbow. I want for you to pick a limited palette of colors. And then once you have chosen the colors that you want to use, using Eyvind Earle to help you out, you are then going to come up with a landscape. I want for you to draw this first as a sketch on a single layer that will help guide you with all of your selection and painting that goes on top of it. Your landscape does not need to be realistic. It could be really fun and abstract and kooky. Or you can use a picture that you have found or you've taken yourself and try to stay as close to it as you'd like, but that's not necessary. So for our final image here, notice just how bold and simple Eyvind Earle can go. As pretty as this one is, I'm going to recommend that you stay a little bit more ornate. A lot of those trees and shrubs and that kind of thing is probably really, really great for this project. So keep that in mind when you are choosing what kind of landscape you want to create. Now that you know a couple of things about Eyvind Earle, let's start to talk about the piece that you're going to be making, and I'm going to walk you through every single thing step by step, even if you are starting from literally square one. So One of the first things you might want to do is collect both a landscape picture that you want to potentially use. You don't have to follow it exactly. It can just be an idea. And you also want to collect maybe a couple or even just one Eyvind Earle painting that you can also reference for color and textures and that kind of fun stuff. Once again, we are not trying to copy anything exactly. We're just using these for inspiration. Once you have those, you are then going to open, whether you're using Photoshop, Krita, or Procreate. If you are in Procreate, you are going to just open a blank canvas that's the size of your screen. If you are in Photoshop or Krita, I'm going to come up here to File, New, and my document is a width of 11 inches. Make sure this is set to inches, and a height of 8.5. This is a very standard page size that you use at school and for everything all the time, so it's a really good size to work at. The resolution for mine is 300. You are also welcome to use 200, just definitely nothing lower than that, and also nothing bigger than that. Make sure all your other settings look something like mine, nothing strange, and you're going to hit create. I'm going to hit close because I already have my document open. If you want to do a piece taller than it is wide, then you are welcome to just switch the height and width sizes. All right, so now we have a blank document, and we are first going to make our sky. So you're going to notice over in this bottom right hand corner where my layers are, I have a lot of layers. If you want to go ahead and come down here to the little page icon next to the trash can and click it a few times, you'll be able to make multiple layers that you can then name before you even get started. So I would recommend doing that, and Procreate, it's up on the top. But once you have multiple layers set up, you're going to just double click and actually name it sky, and then you can move forward. And so your piece might also be like mine, where then I have mountain, and then I have lake, and then I have green hill, and then I have all these other crazy fancy things happening. Cool. So on our sky layer, once again, make sure you're on the layer that you want to be using that's named appropriately before you do anything else. We're going to be using both a selection tool and a gradient. So let's talk about our selection tools. For Photoshop and Krita, they are up over here on the left-hand side. I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool. Notice if I press and hold it, I see other options available inside of here. We're just going to use this regular square one first. I'm going to click and drag for the area where I want for my sky to cover, which is about half of the top of my canvas. For you, it might be a little bit smaller, it might be a little bit bigger. Don't stress out about it. And then I'm going to first show you the paint bucket tool. So over here, once again, over with your tools is your paint bucket. If you do not see it, click and hold, and you will see other options available inside of here. So notice, there's our gradient tool. Also notice that the hotkeys are listed right here next to the tool. So if you like to use your keyboard to switch between your tools, you could just press G and get that tool. So we are going to be using the paint bucket first, and the swatches down here are what are going to actually tell the computer what colors I want to use. So I'm going to click on this top swatch, which is white right now, and for demonstration purposes, I'm going to choose some really ugly bright colors. So I chose a very, very bright red. Remember, when you are choosing colors in here, the best way to do it is to first in your brain tell yourself what color you want to use. So let's say I want dark green. And then on the rainbow slider, I'm going to move to the green area. And then here in the box, I will select how dark or light or saturated I want for my green to be. Cool. So let me go back to that bright red. And I'm just going to click. There we go. I paint bucketed the entire section that I did using the selection tool, just one solid color. And let's say you're like, okay, Machina, that's cool, but I want more than just one solid color. No, also for paint bucketing a whole entire area in Procreate, you can just click and drag the little color onto the canvas area and it will fill the whole space. So I want something a little bit fancier, so I'm going to switch to my gradient tool. Now notice that at the top bar here, some of my options have changed. It is showing me that my gradient is going from red to black, and it's showing I have a standard gradient. It says normal, 100% with only transparency check marked. Now I want for my gradient to go from red to some other color. I don't want for it to be black. And if I click on this little drop down, I see all these other crazy options, which is kind of stressing me out because I just want to choose my other color. So I'm going to come back down to the swatches again and notice that the second swatch underneath the red is black. So I will click it and I will choose a different color for that. So I chose bright yellow. Now you can see on my top bar, it shows what gradient I am using. You can also play and have different kinds of gradients if you'd like. I'm just going to stick with the regular one for now. And then when you are using your gradient tool, when you click and drag out here in the space, it will actually make your gradient. Now the length of which you drag is going to change what your gradient looks like. So a little baby click and drag is going to be a smaller gradient. And the angle at which I click and drag is also going to change the gradient. Cool. So I'm just going to do kind of straight from top to bottom. And now we have our sky. Now, this is very important. I almost did it without mentioning it, but it's very important. Every time you are done using a selection tool, you then want to go back to that selection tool and click somewhere to get rid of the selection. What's going to happen at some point when you're new to this is you're going to have a selection somewhere. You're going to be trying to do something somewhere else. And you're going to be like, why isn't it working, Machina? I'm losing my mind. And it's because of your stupid little selection. So annoying. So make sure to click somewhere outside of your canvas area or even somewhere inside of your canvas area to get rid of the selection. Now you are free to do whatever you want and your selection is gone. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and go to our next layer, which is clouds. I'm going to go ahead and name clouds. If you don't have clouds in your piece, obviously you don't need to do this. And when I eyeball on this layer, using the little eyeballs over here, by the way, that's what I'm doing as I move my way up, I am seeing these beautiful clouds, and you're probably like, whoa, Machina, how did you do that? That's like magic. Well, I didn't actually paint them. I just used a special brush that I downloaded brushes from the internet, and they were free. If I remember, and I hope I do remember, I will put the brush pack on the Google Classroom so that you guys have access to them. But also you can look up your own free brush packs for Photoshop specifically that you can just easily install. It literally only takes like 3 minutes. And then you will have all these really cool options available in your brushes. Now, for some of you, you will be able to come over here to the top right-hand side, and there you go. There's your brushes. Easy peasy. And some of you might be like, oh my God, Machina, I don't see this. Where is it? It is right here at the very, very top where it says window, and then I have all these window options, so I can go to brushes or even brush settings. Either one's fine. And then for Procreate, it's pretty obvious where your brush options are, and you have a lot of them that are pretty similar to these. Now, one other thing that's happening though is I'm not actually on my brush right now, so I need to press B on my keyboard for a brush or switch to my brush tool over here. And now I have all these cool things to use. Once again, when I'm on some other word or doing something else, or if I'm here on brushes, it's gonna look different. I like to use brush settings and click where it says brush tip shape, so that I can actually see all of these guys inside of here. So you can see in here, I have some fancy cool brushes that I downloaded. Otherwise, you're gonna have some pretty standard brushes. Now, standard brushes aren't bad. They are not a bad thing at all. In fact, the brushes I probably use most often are just the regular hard edge circle with shape dynamics turned on, especially if you change this to pen pressure if you're using a pen. And then the other one I use a lot is, back to brush tip shape, the fuzzy edge circle with nothing checkmarked except for transfer. Transfer will make it so that it's extra soft and fuzzy on the edges, which is really good for blending colors and for clouds. So if I choose my brush and I'm very happy with it and I've taken my time, I'm then going to close that little window, and I can use the brackets on my keyboard to make my brush bigger or smaller. So here's me using the brackets. They're on the top right-hand side of your keyboard over by the delete key. And that there's a big blob, and then brackets to make it a lot smaller. There's a smaller blob. Cool. Now you're probably like, Machina, why is it red? Because of our swatches over here, remember? So we need to actually choose the color that I want for my clouds to be, which is probably almost white. And I can literally paint a cloud if I choose to. That's actually totally fine. Let's say you're like, Machina, I really want for my clouds to have a super hard, obvious, sharp edge. I can use one of my other selection tools, which I'm going to get into here in a second, for our mountains. So if you really like using the selection tools, that's fine. If you really like using just a regular hard edge brush, that's totally fine. If you want to install special brushes, you are welcome to do that as well. There's a lot of options when it comes to actually painting, and we've covered some of them already. So let me get rid of these crazy blobs that I did. Oh, actually, here's a good chance for me to review again with you one more time. I did all these things, right? And I did it on the cloud layer, and I go, oh no, I hate it, it's ugly. Instead of trying to hit Command Z or hit the back button a bunch of times, I can use my history, which for me is right here. And once again, if you don't see it, you can go to where it says window and choose history so that this does pop open. And history shows me every single step and thing that I do. So if I want to go back in history to before I screwed this up, I can do that. And so now I just clicked on before I did all the brush stuff to where it says name change. So that layer is still called cloud, but I don't have all those things I don't want. It's a way better and an easier way. It just makes sense in my brain as opposed to just like randomly trying to undo all the stuff I just did. So I'm going to now have my gradient sky and my clouds and turn on the next layer, which are the very, very far away mountains. And I chose the colors for these and just paint bucketed them myself. However, I use different selection tools than just the square one, obviously, right? These are shapes. So right underneath this type of selection tool is this other one called the lasso. If I press and hold the lasso, you'll see I have one that's just a regular lasso and then one that's a polygonal lasso. And then magnetic lasso I never use, it's super annoying. So with the regular lasso tool, when I come out here and I'm clicking and dragging or drawing with my pen, I'm making it a blob and it closes itself. And now I have a selection. If I click somewhere else, the selection disappears forever, right? So know that you don't like do anything permanent when you're using your selection tool until you do something with it. So let's say I want nice blobby hills or clouds or blob mountains. I can totally use this tool to do that. And it's really fun. And you're like, but Machina, your mountains are angular. That's right, because I use the polygonal lasso tool, which in order for me to use well, I need to click, 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 because I'm actually making angled, sharp lines. Now, the other thing also I want for you guys to keep in mind is when you are using these tools, you want to make a shape. So you're not just trying to outline something like this and going across and then going, okay, because you haven't made a shape yet. You need to then go down and around and back up to your starting point. Now, especially for the polygonal lasso tool, you either need to double click or go back to your little starting point to close it. Cool. All right, so I made that shape. Now there's a couple of things I want to show you really quickly in regards to using your selection tools to make sure you don't get super stressed out. So tip number one is when I make my shape, like I said, I can double click to close it. And I'm just going to use a paint bucket here so you can see what's going on. I then need to make sure to click to get rid of my selection. Or if I'm going to make another shape, I can just make sure I'm still on the polygonal lasso tool and start clicking somewhere else, right, to add to it. Now, I just paint bucketed that first shape that I did, and I made a new shape. And when I go to paint bucket this one with a different color, let me go with green, it's going to go up to but not over that last shape I did. That can be a good thing. If you don't want for that to happen, just make sure to click again or even like double, triple click so that it really fills the whole space the way that you want, and then you'll be golden. Cool. And then the other thing as well is, let's say I'm kind of happy with this, but I wish I had added more. Like I wish I had gone over here. So what I can do is use the shift key on my keyboard to add to the selection. So I'm pressing and holding the shift key while I'm adding this extra shape on. And notice that it just attached it to the selection I already had. Let's say I do this and I'm like, oh God, I hate it. I can use the Option or Alt key on my keyboard, and notice that now it's going to take away the shape that I make. Cool? So that should be helpful for you using your lasso tool or polygonal lasso tool. There's very similar options available in Procreate, and pretty much the exact same thing also in Krita. So on another layer on top of mountains, I did a lake. I still just used the simple selection tool and the paint bucket. I haven't used any more gradients. I only used one in the sky. And then my next shape is this, right? And I do something fancy here I'm going to talk about. So first thing I did was I made a careful shape of a mountain that's closer to us. And I made it nice and dark because I wanted to put trees on top of it. So in order to do this, you can do this in Photoshop. I think there's kind of sort of a way to do it in Procreate. Let me know. But if you can't, that's okay. You can get by without. But this is pretty fun because what I have done is I attached a layer to this green hill. And the reason why I attached the layers, you're going to see why right now. I'm going to turn these on. Is because I can then paint, making sure that what I paint only attaches to the hill. So I'm going to explain this to you nice and slow. All right, so I have my layer called hill, and I made the shape that I wanted, and I paint bucketed it this dark blue. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to click the page icon to make a new layer. I'm going to press and hold the Option or Alt key on my keyboard, and I'm just going to move my mouse or my stylus or whatever I'm using so that this little icon shows up. I'm not dragging, I'm not clicking, I'm just moving, like hovering it just a little bit until I see a tiny box with a down arrow between the two layers. When I see that, then I'm going to click. It can be really finicky and kind of hard to make work until you get used to it. What I've just done is I've parented this layer, layer 15, down to Green Hill. Now, whatever I paint or do on layer 15 will only show up on top of Green Hill. You'll see in a hot second. So I have my brush. Let's pretend that I set up a really beautiful, awesome, perfect texture brush and I spent all this time in here. And I have my color chosen down over here. And I'm going to use my brackets to make my brush the size that I want. And I'm going to paint. And you're going to be like, yeah, okay, not that exciting, Nishina. But notice when I start painting over here, how it's only showing up on the mountain and it's not messing up the sky or anything else. Oh, so you can see now when I turn this layer back on, it just looks like a bunch of crazy like scattered blobs, but when I parent it down, it actually is a really nice texture with particular colors I chose with particular brushes to create the effect that I wanted on that mountain. Cool. And then I did a little extra on a separate layer just in case, so that way if I decided I didn't like it, I could always just trash the layer and not have to like start all over again. So that's the other cool thing about parenting layers is, let's say I try to add all this texture to this mountain and I hated it. I could just click and drag the layer down to the little trash can and my actual mountain itself will still be there. So I can just try again and not have to go super far back. Cool. Okay, so now that you know how to do that, here's another piece of ground that I have in front of mountain. And once again, I parented another layer. In case you missed it, I'm pressing and holding the Option key. I'm wiggling my mouse between the two layers until I see the little baby down arrow, and I'm gonna click and it will parent it or unparent it like I just did. Cool, so now that layer is stuck to that one and I'm happy with that. Here's yet another mountain and another shape and another shape and more. Oh, and notice also that sometimes with the selection, you can obviously use your gradient, just like we did with the sky. It can be any shape you want. Here's some more texture parented to the ground. Notice that for this texture here, I chose to use little grasses. Cool. And even more ground. And a little guy that I put in, which you'll want to hand draw if you want to put a little person or a little cabin or whatever in your scene. That can be really nice. And then also I used some special brushes on a layer on top of everything to put in some of these trees. Cool. So once again, those are special brushes that I pulled off the internet. So that way I don't have to paint a tree every single time. I can stamp a tree brush. So you can see over here, I've got leaves and trees and all that fun stuff. Cool. So I will try to put as much supporting info and content for you guys as possible in Google Classroom. You have 2 days. I might even give you an extra one if you want to come back to it. That's totally fine. And remember for this project, you are working independently of me. So make sure that end of today and the end of next class, you send me your piece wherever it is that you're at. If you're only halfway through, that's totally okay. I just want to make sure that you're on track, and that's a good opportunity for you to ask any questions or any clarification. I can do red line drawings on top of your piece, and also make sure, especially for those of you working in any of them, in Photoshop or Procreate or whatever, that you save these as Photoshop documents or layered documents where you still have all these layers. If I come up here to where it says File and I go Save As, I have options to change the format to other things, right? The only ones we need to use in here are JPEG. You can use PNG if you want to, but might as well just use JPEG. And Photoshop is also the one that actually maintains all those layers. So when you email me, it could be a JPEG, or you can send me a Photoshop file. That's also totally fine. That way, when you open it next time and I say, oh, you should really move those clouds, you can do that. So that's one other quick thing I want to mention is notice when I was working back to front, I wasn't worried about overlaps. That way, in case you show me your piece and I say, wow, those clouds are great, they should be up a little bit higher, you can go to the layer that says clouds and move them, and there aren't any weird holes cut out from like the mountain being in front or anything, right? This is still a full whole cloud. So make sure when you're working back to front that you're not like omitting or cutting into things that you don't mean to. Just leave them kind of as whole pieces individually that you can move if and how you need to. Cool. So this whole mountain, notice that there's still ground behind it. So I can change it, move it, do whatever I need to with it. That's kind of the whole point of digital art. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Once again, you have 2 classes, so do not rush, and you are welcome to email me with whatever questions you may have. I will chat with you soon, and good luck. Bye.